Welcome back to another episode of the Bearcat Basketball Podcast. This is Season 2. I'm your host, Alex Meacham, former UC basketball player from 1997 to 1999 under the legendary coach, Bob Huggins. I was fortunate enough to wear the iconic Jordan brand unis during my time. Now, you can follow me on social media. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Alex_Meacham. Meacham is spelled Meacham. I'm also on Facebook and LinkedIn, Alex Meacham. I'm on Snapchat, Big Meach 41. And now, I can officially say this. On Season 2, I am now on TikTok, at Alex Meacham 41. This is a special edition of the podcast, my interview series with a very special guest. The Bearcat Basketball Podcast is now presented by Healthcare Management Group. Shout out to everyone at HCMG, and thank you for the support. Bearcat fans, I'm excited to bring in my next guest. He is currently a staff writer and editor for The Athletic, covering the Cincinnati Bearcats. He is a recurring guest on the Bearcat Basketball Podcast, and really fans just love to hear his insight. And whenever I have him on, we always have great numbers. So I'd like to welcome in my guy, Justin Williams. What's going on, Justin?
Not much. What's up, Meach?
I'm doing very well. And I know you're busy, writing for football and basketball at the same time. And I asked you this question the other day, and I'd like for you to kind of talk about it on the podcast so the fans get to hear this. We're in hoop season right now, but it seems that there's so much movement with football that you're super busy writing football and basketball at the same time.
Yeah, and I mean it's always that way, especially it's not as crazy as under normal circumstances. That kind of like October through December stretch, that's always a little bit of a grind because you got both seasons going at the same time. But yeah, kind of this stretch between end of the season and spring football, that there's always enough football news going on, whether it's, coaching changes or recruiting or anything like that. So I'm always trying to keep, an eye on both camps, especially this season, partly because it hasn't been the greatest basketball season the Bearcats have ever had, but it was a really good football season. So, you want to you want to go where some of the interest is sometimes. So definitely don't want to move away from football when they have a lot of positive momentum going on. But it's also just different right now because normally I'd be traveling some with basketball and there'd be a little bit more in-person availability and stuff like that. And obviously there's not any of that right now. So trying to use that at least to my advantage a little bit and maybe get a little extra football stuff in that normally I wouldn't have time to.
So how is that with not traveling and having to do those things in terms of, writing? Has it helped you at all? Have you just taken a different approach?
I mean, I don't think it's helped at all for me personally, just because I feel like I'm a very, or at least I try to be a visual writer, like try and get scenes from wherever I'm at, and that's been tough. We can still go to the home games, football and basketball, but even that access is limited. You don't, get as much interaction with players and coaches before and after the game, because you're kind of quarantined off from them. So, in football especially, you can't go down on the field and all that kind of stuff. So it's definitely been an adjustment. And, I guess I wasn't necessarily super upset about, having a late Wednesday tip in Tulsa that I might have had to travel for otherwise. So it's not like it's all bad. But definitely, just whether it's the travel or more just kind of the in-person access, it definitely makes it a little bit more challenging to write different things or at least try and get some scenes, which I'm always looking to do. So it's made me adjust a little bit, but I'm hoping after this season we won't have to worry about it too much.
Yeah, no question about that. So with like you mentioned before, the basketball team, up and down, some struggles this season. Do you find that the football team articles and the traction there is bigger than basketball right now for your writing?
I don't know if it's bigger. I mean, when I started doing this, it was going into Fickle's second season, so there weren't the expectations then that there are now on football, and basketball just dwarfed it in terms of attention. To Fickle's credit and the football team's credit, that's not flipped, but it's definitely evened out. And this season has been a little bit weird. I think some of the things, like something like when the Zach Harvey news popped, or when you have a big game, whether it's like a 4-game winning streak or the loss to Houston, like there's going to be interest in that, even if it's not always positive interest. There's going to be some visceral reaction there. But it's definitely like, to have football kind of sustaining the attention during the off season while a basketball season is going on, that's unusual. That's unusual from like a numbers, metrics perspective on articles, but I think it's also just unusual for the Bearcats in general. I don't think it's a bounce people want to see continue, and it's as kind of rough as this season has been. Like last night put them in a good spot to maybe still get a bye going into the conference tournament, which seems kind of ridiculous based on how the season started. But so it's not like the season is completely lost at this point, which again is a credit to them. But it's definitely because of how well the football season went and just a lot of the momentum there. There's definitely been some sustained interest even though the season's over.
And do you find that the Bearcat fans enjoy hearing about some of the guys that have gone on and maybe are working out for the NFL? Because listen, Luke Fickle, I think, and his staff are doing an amazing job recruiting wise, and then also a lot of the guys that just in the short term he's been here are getting some NFL looks and are working out, to hopefully enter the draft. Do you find that fans are very interested in that?
Yeah, I did a piece on Josiah DeGuara last year ahead of the draft, and that got, that was received well. And I did something a couple weeks ago just about where some of these football players might project into the draft, and that did well too. It all, it's all part of it though, right? Because having players go to the NFL is just almost honestly more recruiting for the football program. It's the same in basketball, and the same sense of pride that people have watching UC football and basketball, like that gets carried into whoever's moving on. So it's a little bit of not a newer development, I guess, because there was a stretch there under BK and that kind of era where there was some good NFL products from Cincinnati, but it hadn't really been that way too much for the pre-Fickle and early Fickle years. So I think getting back to some of that is a big pride point, but a point of interest for fans.
Yeah, and people love, like, you look at Kelsey. You've got to think that a lot of Bearcat fans were cheering for, the Chiefs, cheering for Kelsey. He wears Bearcat hats, Kenyon Martin jerseys. He's always wearing that on national TV, and Bearcat fans eat that up, man. And I think they really love to see these guys go on to the NFL and continue to rep, the Bearcat brand on national TV. And actually, I was texting with Derek Forrest last night. Yeah. He and I are close, and he's down in Fort Lauderdale, and he's working out right now. And he told me he's trying to cut his 40 time down right now. And he says if he can cut that 40 time down, he thinks he has a chance that he'll move up a little bit. And all he wants is just an opportunity. He's a fantastic young man. I don't know how well you know him.
Yeah, no, he's great. He was, I don't want to say underappreciated, but I just think he's one of those guys who what he did, in his 4 years, especially those kind of last 3 years where he was really a huge part of the defense. Like, I'm sure they'll miss him. I think they're going to be really good without him, but just kind of what he did is going to be a big part of why they're going to be good going forward.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, by the way, before I forget, I can't – we have to discuss this, but last night with the girls basketball game, Thomas scoring 51 points in a game.
Yeah.
How about
second
that?
Second Bearcat other than Oscar Robertson to drop 50 in a game. And maybe the most impressive is, no three-pointers.
Amazing.
20 field goals, 11 free throws. She's a beast. She went over 1,800 points last night in the process of dropping 51. I think she's fourth all-time on the scoring list for Bearcats women's basketball. And Oscar's ridiculous. He did it, I think, like 6 times. He went over 50 in his UC career, but
Right.
You're talking about no one has done that since 1960 in a Bearcats basketball uniform. Like that's a big deal, and no,
for sure.
She's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and I think I love what's going on with the women's program, and I kind of feel bad in some regards. I don't talk a lot about the women's basketball team. I don't get a chance to watch as many women's games as I think a lot of focus obviously is on the men's team, but I think they're doing some great things with the women's basketball program.
Yeah, I mean, Michelle Clark-Hurd has really kind of turned it around, and a big part too is I think she's on the recruiting trail, like getting someone like Jillian Hayes, who
Yep.
there's still people who are like, how did UC not even talk to or sign?
Don't get me
Hayes?
Don't get me started.
We won't go down that road because I know there's a lot of people like that, but you got to credit someone like her who she's already playing really well as a freshman. I'm sure she could have gone plenty of places across the country, and you come in and get some local talent like that. I mean, she's getting talent regardless, like bringing in Trey Scott's sister and stuff. But I think a good way to really get people excited about that program is you bring in some of that local talent. It just gives that even further connection. So when you can do that, that's a good sign. So no, I'm with you. And when you got players dropping 50, you're going to get attention too, which well deserved.
That helps. Yes, that definitely helps. Well, let me ask you this. I'm intrigued with this question here. How do you determine what you're going to write about? So do the articles kind of like find you, or how does that work?
Yeah, I think for the most part, honestly, during the season, it's a lot of it's just based around like the game schedule, whether you're writing specifically off a game or just kind of figuring out what's coming up next. The storylines usually come up pretty simple during the off season, maybe when you have to get a little more creative or think about a little bit more. And yeah, I don't know. It's not something I ever really think about. I do think sometimes they kind of just like not drop into your lap, but so like I wrote a piece about Kelsey Sharkey, who does all the video and media for the football team.
Mm-hmm.
It's just kind of like about her and what her job's like behind the scenes, and how she's created kind of this brand of UC football for the past couple of years. I've known, Kelsey for however 3 or 4 years, just who she is since I started covering the team, and it's pretty obvious how awesome she is at her job in terms of the stuff she put out. But it was almost kind of like one day it's like, hey, maybe it's time to do something on Kelsey. Like she's done a good job. I think people, if they don't know her, they know her work, and so
right.
Things like it wasn't necessarily like someone mentioning it to me necessarily, or it wasn't like some big epiphany, but it's like, that story's been out there, I could have done it 2 years ago or something like that. It's just, you do it at certain times when you have a chance to.
Yeah.
So there's definitely little things like that. But yeah, it's almost like you're kind of sprinkling those ideas in between the stuff that you almost have to do just because it's like, part of the news cycle or availability cycle or whatever like that.
And have you ever thought about, okay, I'm going to write this article, and then you write it and you're just like, oh man, this is great stuff? Because I always feel like, let me think of an example. Okay, my favorite rapper of all time is Jay-Z, and I've always said Jay-Z has so many great songs, but I always think like Jay-Z's Empire State of Mind, like that's not one of my like all-time favorite Jay-Z songs, but I feel like when he recorded that, he had to have walked out of that booth and listen and go, oh my God. This is unbelievable, because it became such a national anthem, just all across stadiums. The Yankees picked it up. Like, he knew it was a home run. Have you kind of experienced that writing an article? I know it's kind of like pumping your chest, but you ever write one and go, oh man, this is it?
I can guarantee you I've never in my life felt like Jay-Z at any point, unfortunately for me. So I can't identify with your analogy necessarily. He's on a couple planes higher than I am.
Sure. the feeling of the content you're creating when you've hit a home run.
So I talk to my wife about this a lot, because especially if it's like a bigger piece that you're spending a lot of time on, there's usually a point like when I'm writing it where I might feel like I'm really excited about this story or, these interviews, these quotes that I've done. At some point in that process, like I'm always going to get to a point where I just hate the story. Sometimes it's like in the middle or right when it's about to come out, or right after it comes out or something. I think that's just part of whether it's the writing process or my personal writing process. I don't know, but that's just something where I'm just like, this isn't getting where I need it to go. Hopefully that I go through that before it actually is like done and comes out. So, I can feel good about it when it gets to that point. I guess I'll say there's definitely pieces where I feel like, okay, I feel like I got to where I wanted to go on this one. I got the quotes that I wanted to go to. I feel like I told, the story that I wanted to, but even then it's so strange. I never totally know like what's going to hit or resonate and what doesn't. And sometimes it's like a piece where, I worked really hard on it and did a bunch of interviews and, not that like it falls flat, but it's just like, oh, I thought that might, get more attention or do a little better than I thought it would. And then there's the flip side where it's like, I didn't think this was going to catch on the way it did. And people seem to like it more than maybe I anticipated. So, and that's a good thing because I always try not to like feed in, don't have too high of expectations, when you're doing a piece. And then there's definitely like the separate ones. Like, look, I didn't really know how much the John Brannon dad story that I wrote before the season was going to catch on, but I did know like this is a big story. There's a lot of stuff in here people don't know. It's really interesting. So I definitely felt like, okay, this is one I feel good about and one I think might do well. But even then, it's like you never. Because it's also depend on things you can't control, like whether it's on your beat or something else. If something else happens, right as you put the story out, some weird breaking news story, or something happens that kind of overshadows it. That's stuff you can't control either. So you never really know when it comes out, like when something's going to hit or when it's not. But it is, I will say, it's a really nice, rewarding feeling when like you put out a story, whether you worked hard on it or, more than others or not. And it's kind of well received. That part never gets old for sure. I'm sure Jay-Z would say the same thing.
Well, you know what? It's funny just to kind of piggyback what you were saying earlier about you never know what will hit and resonate with the folks. You think about, back to hip hop, Notorious B.I.G., he hated Juicy. Like he did not want that song to come out, and Puffy was like, no, this is going to be a hit. He's like, nah, people are not going to like this. I mean, and I can't go anywhere. I have started, like, I'll recite the first part of those lyrics, and everybody will repeat the whole, like, we'll start doing the whole song. It's become such a cultural thing with that song. It was all a dream. I used to, everybody knows, but he didn't want that. So, even in his eyes, he didn't know that was going to really hit home with a lot of folks. So, like you say, you never know. And it kind of segue from, taking that Empire State of Mind, the Jay-Z song. And that was off the Blueprint 3 album, which wasn't really received very well. A lot of people didn't like Jay-Z's Blueprint 3 album as well as the other ones. But I want to use that to segue into this Bearcat basketball team. Like, what is the blueprint for this basketball team's success? Because, I mean, I personally feel like every game that this Bearcat team plays, it's kind of its own thing. Like, every game sits in its own space, and it's seemingly different from the last one. So, again, this segment we're going to jump into is sponsored by the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of Cincinnati, and they have a new flexible bachelor's degree that will allow you to graduate conveniently and affordably, and you won't lose any credit or have to start over. So I do want to take a step back, Justin, and jump into the Houston game. I don't know what can be said, but just, thoughts on the Houston game?
Yeah, it's one of those where, like, I don't think you burn the tape and just forget about it, because I guess my biggest takeaway in the immediate aftermath was, like, this shows how rough this season has been and, how much of a drop-off there's been in the team. I don't want to – I'm not saying that, like, drop-off in the program. I don't think this is some sign of, like, the program necessarily going in the wrong direction or anything like that. But just if you're comparing like where the team was last year to this year, they beat Houston at home. They came back from a deficit. They end up getting the top seed and getting a share of the conference title, beating out Houston for that. And it was just clear that like this year these two teams are not anywhere close to the same level. And honestly,
right.
I know Houston lost to Wichita State and freaking East Carolina somehow, which that just shows you like how random all this is. But honestly, no one is on Houston's level from what I've seen in the conference this year, which makes sense. They're like a top 10 program in college basketball. So in that sense, it didn't surprise me like that it was kind of a clear divide. I think the difference was, and honestly, impressively, we saw a little bit of the opposite last night in that Tulsa game, but this is a program that this season has not had the leadership or really just like the togetherness as a team that when things start to go wrong, they can kind of like battle and hold it together for the most part. I actually think we saw a little bit of that last night against Tulsa.
Agreed.
Now in that Houston game, we're probably talking if they like hunker down and they come together and they play really well, they're probably losing by 15 to 20 as opposed to 38. So like that shows you right there. That I don't think they were going to win that game the way Houston was playing the other night. But I think that was kind of a sign of like, here's some of the issues that have plagued them, just like on steroids in that Houston game. And there's plenty of reasons for that. I've written about them. I'm probably going to write a lot more about them here in the coming weeks. Like, I know people are so sick of the impact of COVID because of the way it's impacted their own personal lives, but it really has had a profound impact on, obviously college basketball and all sports, but like this team specifically just because of its makeup and its youth and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
So I don't know that things would look this way under kind of a normal season circumstance, but I think some of the struggles and shortcomings and issues that this team was always going to have this season have gotten kind of underscored and highlighted by some of that stuff. And the Houston game felt like the perfect storm for, all right, they're not going to win that game. If they really come together and play really well, they're losing that game by a dozen. But instead, they just kind of collapsed and fell apart. And as John Brandon said, they got boat raced. And it just really kind of made obvious some of the issues.
Yeah, and I think, too, you look at what really concerned me going into that game was Houston loses to Wichita State. And Houston being a top 10 team in the country, very talented. And I remember the days playing for Bob Huggins, and we had some very talented top 10 teams. You did not want to play us after we lost to a team we shouldn't have lost to. You did not want to play us the next game. Huggins was going to have us so prepared. And that was my concern kind of going into this game. It wasn't necessarily all Bearcats. It was Houston's going to be ready to beat us. And they're going to be ready to beat us because they also know, the Bearcats have been the creme de la creme of the conference, and Houston always wants to beat us. So they kind of had that, chip. And I was texting with some of the Wichita State players. I know a couple of them I've known them for a long time, Bryson Bush and a couple of those guys. And we were talking about it. I said, well, how in the world did you guys, beat Houston? They talked about the physicality of it. And they were texting me saying, we think you guys can beat them. And I said, I appreciate that, but I don't like the fact that you guys beat them. I feel like we would have had a better chance if Wichita State lost to them and Houston kind of came in like, we'll probably beat the Bearcats. But you're right, though, man. The separation is just – it was so evident in that game. And listen, Justin, I thought we started off well. I think we shot, I don't know how many threes we made to start off the game, but then
I think it was 3 for 3 maybe.
3 for 3?
I think so. They went up 19-18 with 12 minutes left or 10 minutes left, something like that. So the way it started, it wasn't like they just got beat right out of the breaks, but yeah, it went downhill after
that. Downhill over the it was just it was right. It was really, really bad. And what then transpired, I think, not only during the game but after the game is you start to look at everything going on. So fans are starting to look at okay, Zach Harvey has opted out. He may not return. There's rumors about Tari. We look at, the guys that, have, Rapp left and Gabe opted out. So you put all this together, and then the Houston loss, and everyone's like, Brandon's not the guy. These recruits suck. And it's just like, oh God. And I'm like, I'm not going on Twitter and fighting all these folks, but and it's tough because, and I've said this, I don't know, I want to get your opinion on this, but I feel it's so tough to judge any basketball program this year. It's just so tough with every program. I have kids that I know that are playing college basketball all over the country, and all of them are dealing with different issues with their teams, regardless of the success they're having or not. It's just a tough year. You mentioned the pandemic, but just all around. It's almost like you just have to say it is what it is this year.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I definitely don't think anyone should be like 31 or 38-point loss, like that's no big deal, because I don't think that's the case. Like, you never want to get beat by a conference team, by 38 points. But you're right in the sense that, fans are emotional, and so everything's going to kind of come to a head at one time when something like that happens. But then you saw it last night, like, I saw people saying like, oh man, if we could just get, we get a good athletic big, like this could be a tournament team next season. And I'm not sure if that's true either, like, to be fair, but it just shows you how, and that's, again, that's like sports. That's being a fan. That's that you kind of live and die with every moment. So when it's a 38-point blowout on ESPN, like you really die with that. And I do think I think that moment was humbling in a lot of ways for coaches and players. And I think, that has an impact too. But yeah, no, I do think there's a lot of factors at play. I don't think any of them excuse a 38-point loss, but I also think, you always have to have a broader, or at least it's tougher for fans to have a broader view. So I'm always trying to have a broader view of like, all right, how do they come back from this? If they would have gotten blown out by 38 at Houston and then they lost the last, 5 games, they had left on the season and clearly just had, no fight whatsoever, that's a bigger deal than getting blown out by 38. Totally. And then whatever happens, obviously they pulled out a big win last night. Maybe they finish 5-0 after that. Maybe they finish 2-3 or 3-2. But it's all you have to kind of take all of that into context, and as well as you do the entire season, like you said. So I don't blame anyone for being emotional or upset, but I guess I'm always trying to be like, trying to take some of that emotion out of it, because you can be disappointed or frustrated, I think, without like going straight to, we got to fire the coach, or, we got to blow up the whole program, or anything like that. But I also, I love sports too, so I get why people respond emotionally.
I think that's well said. It's almost like this season, just not only Bearcats, but just basketball in general. It's like watching Keeping Up with the Kardashians. Do you ever watch Keeping Up with the Kardashians? Have you ever with your wife? I
can't say I'm like a big Kardashian head. I'm aware of all the characters involved, but
there are a lot of characters. But have you watched the show?
I don't know that I've ever actually sat down and watched an entire episode, but
okay. I feel like
I think I get the gist of it.
Don't want to admit it. I
would.
Like you have, but you have. Listen,
trust me, I have no pride. I would tell you if I watched it.
I watch it, and I tell you why I watch it. Well, first of all, it's fascinating to even get your arms around how this family has put themselves at the platform they're at, just fame and wealth. Like, one of them's a billionaire. So I watch it's so fascinating to really dive inside people of that level of fame and wealth and watch them move around every single day. But like Keeping Up with the Kardashians, there's so many moving parts on that show. Like, this person's angry, this person leaves the house, blah, blah, blah. That's kind of like watching the Bearcats. It's like, Rat's gone, Dude's out, Dude's in, Gabe's out, Harvey's out. Like, and speaking of Harvey out, what are your thoughts on that? If you want to, say anything. I know a lot of Bearcat fans have been talking about that on Twitter.
Yeah, I mean, look, like, it's not good when someone leaves the program, and it's not good when it's the I guess, the fourth opt-out, but Duke came back, so the third player to basically opt out for the season in a season that's kind of a shortened schedule and all that. So that's not good. I think I don't know. It just seemed like it was not a good fit, not from the beginning, but, if you just go back to how Harvey got here, it was late in that, 2019 cycle, I guess, like ahead of the 2019-20 season. And, we've written about some of the baggage and issues that he came in with. And, to his credit, there has not been like any, legal trouble or anything like that. And I don't think anyone who was involved in that decision actually thought that was going to be the case. But I think just beyond that, it was a kid who, for many reasons, not just legal issues, like was a very talented, highly ranked player. But his, I guess, list of suitors, destinations definitely dried up a little bit. And John Brannon's in a new job, and, wants to make a splash and has roster spots to fill. And so he, has a relationship with the kid and some of the kid's coaches and takes him. And it just, in the end, a year and a half later, or whatever it is, turned out to actually not be a good fit. I think on either side. And, I think you could make an argument sometimes that, like, why wasn't Zach playing a little bit more? And, I thought he was playing really, really well, and it felt like he was starting to put it together before that layoff. But then they had the layoff, and then he misses the 2 games after that, and then he doesn't play much in the next 2 games, and clearly, like, his body language is not good. That UCF game, I mean, where we're sitting right now in the arena. Yeah, and, like, we're sitting right behind the bench, and he just, like, he patted that entire game. And, look, like, from his perspective, I get it. He probably thought, like, man, I was playing really well. I want to help the team. I want to play more. But it almost just felt like there was this recognition that, like, this isn't going to fit. He's not going to fit into John Brannon's, culture or system that he wants to do. Zach probably feels like I can go somewhere and play more. I want to play more. And wherever you come down on that divide, honestly probably fed into what you felt prior to that. Like if you were a John Brannon defender and supporter, even as things were going rough, then you're probably going to say like, well, he didn't play up to his recruiting rankings, or he wasn't a great fit for the system. If you were like, we got a top 54-star recruit, he needs to be in there and playing, well, then him leaving is only going to rankle you even more. I think the truth is, as usual, probably somewhere in the middle of that. But I think what it ultimately comes down to is Zach Harvey was not a good fit for the system and the culture John Brannon wants to implement. Now, it's now on John Brannon to show and prove that culture and system that he wants to implement is going to win games, is going to get recruits that do fit that style of play, and that does take time. But that's the balance right there. So if in a couple of years the roster stabilized and they're battling for AAC championships every year and going to the tournament and stuff like that, then I think you say like, hey, that worked out. If the opposite happens, then you could point to that as a data point for like, here's an example of where things go wrong. But you hired John Brannon to do a job to implement his culture and his system, and it just seemed like that wasn't going to work with Zach Harvey. And that's on the floor too. There was also just a bunch of off the floor stuff. Zach kind of hinted at it in his message on Twitter. John Brannon talked about it a couple of days afterwards. So I think the fit in terms of basketball, on the floor, off the floor, personally, mentally, emotionally, there was just a lot of things that weren't coming together. Maybe that would have been different in a non-pandemic season, but maybe it just sped up kind of the inevitable conclusion of that too. I guess it's hard to say.
And so many of these student athletes go through so many things off the court that a lot of fans and even myself don't even know about. And I mean, how you operate off the court, things that are going on off the court, they do impact what happens on the court. I know it seems like playing basketball is a release from things that are happening outside in the real world, but it does impact these young people that are 19, 20, 21 years old, and it's not an easy thing. And you mentioned something that I do want to say on Zach too, like saying that he's not, because everything you just said is 100% true, and saying that he wasn't a fit for Brandon's system or culture, whatever, like I don't want that to be an indictment on Zach, because it's not. It just wasn't the right
pairing, but of system and player, or coach and player, or whatever. But that's not to say that like it was either of their fault necessarily, and certainly not Zach's fault, for feeling like it wasn't working and he had to move on. So I certainly don't think it should be like, well, it was a bad kid or anything like that, because I don't think that's the case. I think it was just like a situation that didn't work out.
Well, you know what, and I'll say this. And I've never said this on the podcast before. I remember when Harvey first got to UC, and I went to a practice, and I was talking with all the new players, just kind of introducing myself. Hey, I'm Alex, former player, blah blah blah. And I went over and I spoke to Harvey, and he and I have a mutual friend, a young man that is from the same area he's from, that played high school basketball against him. And so we got a mutual friend. So I kind of dropped the name, and he's like, oh, yeah, I know B, blah, blah, blah. So I said to Harvey, I said, how are things going? Like, the season hadn't started yet. I think maybe a week away from the first game. I said, how are things going for you? How are you adjusting to coach, blah, blah, blah. And he looked at me and he said, very overwhelming. And think about this, Justin. You think about a kid who comes in and at one point during his high school career, was looked upon as whatever star. I think wasn't Kansas recruiting him or offered him, or wasn't that the original school? So
yeah, Kansas was on him. Like, he was a Kansas kid, and they were on him pretty early. Yeah. Right.
So you've got all this, and you've got everybody looks at this kid as a certain type of high level player, and he looked me in the eyes just like a deer in the headlights and goes, it's very overwhelming. Just like it was almost too much for him. And I was kind of shocked. I was kind of taken back by it, because I was expecting an answer like, oh yeah, man, I'm just trying to adjust to this and that, and I'll be fine, I'll be good. But it was like, oh my God, this is a lot of stuff. So, and I want to use that to segue into something you were talking about before, that a lot of Bearcat fans are really being hard on Coach Brand and his staff about it, and that is recruiting. And you just haven't heard a lot about recruiting and who they're going after. I think in a lot of ways, fans just want to hear names. Like, they don't even know how good the player is or what. They just want to hear names. Who are they recruiting? And people will look at Fickle and say, well, Fickle and them are recruiting all these guys. And I say, football's different, man. You're recruiting hundreds of kids, and names are all out there. Basketball is a little bit different. You're looking at individual pieces, and there's a science to it. And I think, and correct me, I want to get your opinion on this. Correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I feel like Coach Brand, his staff, based on the opt-outs and kids leaving and his system, he's trying to find the right fit, because these next 2 years are crucial for Coach Brandon. Like, I think we all knew year 2 was going to be tough, but year 3 and 4 are crucial. He's got to have the right guys in.
Yeah, no, totally. And you're right. And first of all, that like football recruiting is very different from basketball. And let's be honest, it probably doesn't help Brandon and the basketball team that Fickle and football have just completely killed it on the recruiting trail, because there's like now a little bit more of that thirst and interest in the recruiting side on football. Basketball is different, and honestly, like, John's different. He does not like to necessarily talk about the recruiting side as much. He's very analytical, very cerebral, very careful in what he decides. And honestly, like, the Zach Harvey thing is a good example of that. That was not John Brandon's normal preferred kind of like recruiting approach. It was taking a kid late that he didn't necessarily have a great assessment on, but because of the circumstances, because he was a highly ranked kid, because he had a relationship, because it was his first off season and he's trying to fill spots. Not that he took a gamble, but I think that under normal circumstances that might not necessarily have been a decision he made. Or maybe when it's a kid who's ranked that high, you're like, it's worth taking a chance, and then you see what happens. I feel the recruiting way the same way I feel about just kind of the on-court thing, which is, I'm not going to tell anyone like, oh, it's totally fine, you just need to trust or not worry. Like, it is fair to be like, we have 0 players signed for next season, if you're a UC fan, and they've had maybe 2 to 3 more spots that are going to open up that they weren't necessarily envisioning going into next season because of opt-outs and things like that. So not only do you not have players signed, but now you have more spots you have to fill. So I'm not going to say like, oh, don't be skeptical of that or don't ask questions because I think it's fair to. But I also, at this point, it's kind of like John Brandon has made clear he didn't want to sign players in the early signing period because he couldn't go and make evaluations on players. Mm-hmm. I think it's fair to disagree with that, approach too, especially just because of the circumstances of the pandemic. But that's his approach. All right, so let's see what he does with it. It's pretty clear the transfer portal, transfer market is going to just be completely wild and out of control, compared to anything we've ever seen before. And so I think that's going to have an impact on the college kids. It's also going to have an impact on these high school kids that are coming out because people are going to be leaving spots open for transfers and putting a lot more attention in there from a recruiting standpoint. So it's almost one of those things where like, all right, let's see how they do with this, because just on paper, I think you have to give him credit for how he's rebuilt the roster his first two seasons.
I agree.
Now, totally. He had 7 new players both of the first 2 years. Clearly not all of those have worked out. We've seen that this year, like the Rapolas-Ivanauskas signing. People were excited about it, when it happened. It didn't work out at all. Zach Harvey, it wasn't this year, but it was last year. But, that's one people were excited about. It didn't work out. But then you can look at, all right, Mike Adams-Woods. Honestly, that was a similar situation just in terms of, I don't think they had a great assessment or, long-standing relationship with him, but they took him, and he's a really important, valuable part of the program. They land a guy like David Ajulius, who's a former 4-star recruit at a high school who was highly touted, and he's a big part of the team this season, is going to be a huge part of it next season. Tari Eason, top 75 guy from the West Coast, who I realize, has I think struggled and maybe lost a little bit of confidence right now, and he's always the one that people are freaking out about, but they got him here. And so I think it'll be interesting to see, okay, the same way that this season has just put a lot more eyes or concern or pessimism or whatever you want to call it, it's going to be the same in the recruiting landscape this offseason, especially with these extra spots. But John Brandon has his system, his culture. He trusts it. That's what he wants to go for. So let's see what he does with it. And, I think when you hire a coach, you hire them to do the job. And so you kind of have to at least assess how they do at that perspective and then make some decisions. So I'm interested to see, just like everyone else, who they bring in and who they land this summer and how many guys they're going to have to get. But I do think that has also added to some of the concern, because when you're not playing that well and players are leaving and then you don't have, names as this guy's coming in next, that just adds to all of the anger and frustration. I totally get that. But from my perspective, reporting on it, I'm kind of more of all right, let's see what they do with this, because they have added some interesting pieces the past 2 off seasons. And if they can replicate that and more importantly, stabilize that heading into next year, then it'll be interesting to see, what they do with that moving forward.
And I think you're right in that, a lot of fans are saying, okay, this year's been frustrating, but so-and-so's coming in to save us next year. A lot of times you think about, okay, go back to Mick Cronin's first 2 years. And I remember having a conversation with Mick. People wanted Mick fired. They were talking about buying one of those helicopters that fly over UC that says fire Mick Cronin. Somebody was trying to do that. But that's how fans are. And I will never forget this. I was at a practice, and Mick and I were talking, and he goes, I know everybody wants me fired, but trust me, we're going to turn this around. And one of the things that he was talking about was the fact that Yancey Gates was coming in the next year, his 3rd season. He felt like Yancey was going to kind of be that piece that helps elevate specifically recruiting, because you got a big piece like Yancey. And Bearcat fans have to remember, in Mick's 2nd season, they go and play UConn and get beat by 40-something at UConn. And then they go 45 points and then go on to lose the next, that was the last regular season game. So I think the next game's the conference tournament. They lose that. They lose to Bradley in the CBI, whatever the hell that is. And, they lose the last, 4 or 5 games. I forget what the losing streak was. And people were kind of like, But that all worked out. And I think what fans have to remember is, and specifically with Coach Brandon, I feel like Coach Brandon runs marathons. He's like, it's going to take a little bit of time. Let me get my pace down. But once we get this going, we're going to be, headed in the right direction. But I want to talk about a piece you wrote as we talk about recruiting. And I love this kid. I've known this kid since he was a ball boy at Moeller High School, watching his brother. He was a little chubby kid running. I always remind him of this. He was a little chubby kid that had like Snickers and Skittles in his pocket, and they would fall out while he was a ball boy at Moeller. And now he is one of the most important pieces to Bearcat basketball right now. That's Jeremiah Davenport, and you wrote a fantastic article about him. Would you like to talk about that?
Yeah, and I mean, from a recruiting perspective, just on Jeremiah first, that's, for if you're going to point to someone like Rapp or Zach Harvey as kind of a miss by, this coaching staff, man, you got to just talk about how they hit on a kid like Jeremiah Davenport, who didn't have a ton of interest offers coming out of high school from Moeller, got a little bit more when he went to Hargrave, but, it's a guy that John Brandon was on immediately when he got the job. And, felt like, even if fans didn't see it last year, I certainly didn't see it last year, felt like he could be a really important piece for what they're doing. And yeah, he's totally become that. So that's a credit from an evaluation and development standpoint on their end. And you're right. I mean, it's John Brandon mentioned this a couple weeks ago after a game. Jeremiah, he and I talked about this when I talked to him for this piece. Like, it's always a little bit more special when you got a local kid who grows up being a fan of a program, and he said this is his dream school. This was his dream to come to Cincinnati and play. All his coaches, high school coaches who I talked to, said like, this is, Jeremiah wanted to play at Cincinnati. When he got that call from John Brand that he was coming to see him, like that, that's a seminal moment for him, because he's like, I might have a chance to play at Cincinnati. And so then when you take all of that, but also just factor like the energy of this kid and kind of, the heartbeat that he is for this program right now, and the sense of leadership that he's going to be able to bring to them moving forward, that's huge. And we saw last night the play he makes at the end of the game, and honestly, a couple plays he made throughout the course of that game. It shows some of his potential, but also just how cool is it to, if you're a Bearcats fan, to, how many guys you've been upset who have been local kids who have gone elsewhere. Well, this kid might not have been the most highest rated one or anything like that, but he's at Cincinnati, and he has a big sense of pride about that, and it's really working out well. So yeah, that part was cool to write about.
And so your articles are proving to be very prophetic. You write that, and then I think you go from writing that article to this game, the Tulsa game, and he was, in a lot of ways, the key piece to winning this basketball game. So you were the timing.
It was nice. It was nice too, because the timing was not initially great. There wasn't like a big thirst for a feel-good hometown hero piece after that 38-point loss to Houston. As much as people like JD, so it was nice that then kind of like the day after it came out, you kind of got to see everything that I was trying to get at in that piece, including, you mentioned it too, every single person I talked to was like, yeah, man, he was a little chunky kid, and I guess you can say that when you end up being like a 6'7", ripped college athlete. It's a little easier to look back and laugh, but even like that was one of the first things Jeremiah mentioned to me when we talked. Like, oh yeah, I was actually like a chubby football player when I was growing up.
When I tell you, I am not making this up. And he comes from a tremendous basketball family. Oh my gosh,
it's ridiculous.
It is. It's. I mean, when it's all said and done, the Davenport family and the basketball community will definitely be up there, as far as what they've accomplished compared to like the Larkin family, the Wolf family, all the great families, the sports families of Cincinnati. But, I remember watching his brother Michael when he played, and Jeremiah when he played at Moeller, and Jeremiah was a ball boy. I'm not kidding you. When like Skittles would literally fall out this kid's pocket, and he'd pick them up off the ground and put them in his mouth. I joke with him about that. He's like, "You're right. I'll drop Skittles and eat them." And this little chubby guy. But you make a great point. I love to see a kid that says, "This is my dream school. This is where I'm going," and he ends up there. and it becomes an important piece. And I think one of the keys with JD is, and Hugs used to always say this, if you play extremely hard every time you're out there, regardless of your skill level, height, and all that, good things are bound to happen. And I think since the day Jeremiah has stepped on this campus, he has played hard, and good things have happened for him.
Yeah, I talked to Lee Martin, who he's an assistant at Ohio University right now, which is my alma mater, but he was a head coach at Hargrave for 7 years, I think. And he had JD that prep school year, and he said he's like, he views playing hard as a skill. That yeah, there's some guys who you can say they're really talented, but we need to speed them up or make them work a little harder, and you can do that the same way that you can improve your game at something else. But he was like to play that hard as a skill, and because of that, he always viewed Jeremiah as like one of those kids who was going to make it and have an impact, because yes, he had the talent, but he also just had that motivation and energy. And that comes out in other ways too. Like there's guys who play hard, but they aren't real exuberant, or screaming and yelling or leaders or something like that. And Jeremiah has that too. And I think on this team specifically, they really need that guy, like that hype man kind of guy. And so he brings that in addition to, some of the small ball versatility that he brings on the court. Like he also, I think, is just a huge lift for that team on the sideline, in the locker room, all that kind of stuff.
Right. And this segment is sponsored by the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of Cincinnati. And I want to jump into this Tulsa game a little bit more. And after getting stomped by Houston and have to go back on the road to play and to bounce back, the one thing that really stuck out to me, and I'm not sure, where did you watch the game, by the way?
In my basement.
You watched it in your basement. So you're watching the game just like I am. And did you notice the energy from the bench when players were doing things successfully on the court? I mean, the bench was going crazy. Like you look at, Mikey Saunders, who I'm not even sure what he played, 8 minutes maybe. I don't know, but he didn't play a lot. He is going crazy cheering for his teammates. And I felt like everybody on that bench was engaged. Did you notice that?
Yeah, no, I thought so too, and I think that goes back to, I think that Houston loss was really humbling for everyone involved, and it was painful, but I think maybe there was some good that came out of it. And I think one of it was just like maybe bringing guys a little bit closer, because of that. And I think we saw that last night. First of all, I think everyone, coaches, players, realized how important that game last night was. We talked about earlier, if things just completely went off the rails and fell apart the rest of the season after that Houston game, then I think you have really big problems heading into the off season. If they're able to bounce back and kind of salvage it, and they certainly did last night, that's a real positive. And I'm with you. I thought that was a big deal. I was just most impressed. Tulsa's an okay team. I think they're 10-10 overall, so they're kind of right in that same 500 realm that UC's at this season, but they're a really veteran team. They have a bunch of juniors and seniors. They're playing at home on, senior night. I realize it's not a normal senior night. But for UC to go in there, get down by a dozen early and come back, and then fight off kind of this late game collapse when they had the lead, that to me was the biggest takeaway, which was like they could have folded right away. They could have folded at the end, especially coming off that Houston loss. And the fact that they kind of just battled back from both of those and pulled out a win, even though it's a 10-10 Houston or Tulsa team, like that to me is a big deal that they were able to do it from that perspective.
And so I was at a high school basketball game last night. First high school basketball game I've been to all year. I went out to Turpin versus Oak Hills, and
wasn't that like a 28-21 overtime win or something like that?
So it was a football game. So Turpin won the football game on a last-second touchdown, 28-21. It was like, how do I explain this? Coach Price, the head coach of Oak Hills, and Josh Sloan, the head coach of Turpin, two great individuals. I know both of them very well, and they both are very meticulous with detail offensively and defensively. And it was going to be a grinded-out Big Ten football game. Every possession. It was one of those games where any shot, if it wasn't wide open, seemed like a terrible shot. Like that's how detail-oriented every possession was. So that game is going to the end, and I said to myself, okay, I'm gonna jump in the car. I'm gonna go watch the Bearcat game with my dad because I watch every game with my father. I told my dad I might be a few minutes late, Dad, and the game goes into overtime. I think it was like 19-19 in the regulation, and it's going into overtime. I call my dad. I'm like, you're never gonna believe this, Dad. It's 19-19, and it's in overtime. I'm gonna be late for the game, and so the game ends. It's sometime after 9. I call my father, Justin, and I'm like, Dad, I'm getting in the car. I'm on my way. And he goes, take your time. We look like crap. And I'm like, oh, God. So I get in the car, and Dan Horde just seems like he's beside himself. and all of a sudden, we start getting it together. We start making a run. And I'm like, you know what? I need to stay in the car. I'm a crew. So, Justin, I literally drove around for a little bit longer because I didn't want us to lose out. I'm like, what is wrong with me?
That's what I was talking about. Like, fans are emotional. I love that about sports fans. I'm the same way about stuff like that. Like, you really believe that you driving around in the car was going to have any impact on the game, and who am I to tell you were wrong? Like, I love that.
I seriously, I swear on the Bible that I did not get out of the car until after halftime. I was just kept driving around, and I said to myself, okay, I was so hungry because I didn't eat before the game, so I left at like 5 o'clock to get out there. So I hadn't eaten, and it's literally 10 o'clock, and I have to eat every 2 hours or I go crazy. So I'm like, I got to go in the house and eat, and I'm like, if we lose this game, it's my fault because I got out of the car. I'm like, what is wrong with me? So, but anyway, like I said earlier, kind of leading into this, every game is just so different for this Bearcat team. You just never know what you're going to get. And at one point during the game, I don't know if you felt this way. This was in the second half. I think we might have went up 9 or something like that. And I said to myself, could we actually blow this team out? I thought that for a second. And then we do like 2 dumb things, and I'm like, well, never mind. But we were like there where we would just do what I call 2 to 3 positive plays. It crushes Tulsa and we take off. But we just can't sustain that greatness during the game, Justin.
Yeah, I mean, Brandon's talked about this. He talked about it last year. That was a team that was a lot better than this season, and it was the same deal. Like, every game came down to the last minute. And he made a comment about it last night after the game that, he kind of like dad joked with the players in the locker room. Like, if you guys want to win by 12 or 15 one game, I'd be fine with that. But yeah, I don't know what it is because at this point it's not just this team. It happened last year too. There's just something about it where, to their credit, when they get down, Houston game aside, they battle back and they didn't fold up, but yeah, they went up. I think they went up 9 in the second half at one point, like 59 to 50, and then obviously just the game got tight at the end. I think some of that is youth and the inexperience and a little the needing to find kind of that culture and leadership. I definitely think that is part of it too. But I'm with you at this point. It just seems like it's like the next game they win by a dozen or something like that. I'm gonna be blown away.
I think we all will. But you know what? At least they're winning these now. They're not losing them like they were prior. And finding ways to lose games. But I think one adjustment that I saw, and I'm not sure where the adjustment was, if it was adjustment with Keith internally or if it was Coach Brandon, but the move that you've got Keith handling the basketball and kind of breaking down the defense, drawing that extra defender and then dumping it off. I mean, he made down that stretch, he made some tremendous passes, a couple to Tari, to I think Boat. I thought he was fantastic last night.
No, he was great, and you're right. And he showed a little bit of that in that UCF game too, in terms of distributing. I remember he had a real nice pass to Micah on a back cut kind of late in the second half. That gave him a little bit of a cushion. And I mean, he had 6 assists last night, and there were, he could have had, 9 or 10, honestly, if a couple, guys hit a shot, or there's that one Tari dunk that came right after the shot clock went off. I'm with you. That was the best game he played this year. I think it was probably the best game he played since that South Florida game last year when Jaron was hurt. And, I asked John about it after the game. He said that they've been showing Keith, tape film of when he gets the, he has a high usage rate. When he gets the ball, teams know he's going to do something with it. And, they showed him teams are just running doubles at him because they know, like, all right, he's gonna attack the basket and take a shot or something like that when he gets the ball. And I think they were trying to tell him, like, trust your teammates. You command the defense that they're going to come after you, then you dish it and get easy buckets. And I'll be honest, like, I think Keith has a ton of strength. And I kind of hate that, like, this has had to be his senior season with all the COVID nonsense and stuff like that he's never really going to get the kind of senior season and send off that he properly deserves. But I didn't know that he had that part of his game in him. Like, I didn't think he had kind of that vision and distributing ability. I thought he's an athletic freak. He's a really good basketball player. I just didn't think that was one of his strengths. And I know people are probably listening to this thinking, like, why couldn't he have done this 2 months ago? And I totally get that, but I give him credit for, like, recognizing that and kind of embracing that here a little bit down the stretch. And, if he can do that consistently, which has always been the thing with Keith, if he can continue that over these next 4 games, I'm not going to be the one to say, like, oh, they can, make a run in the conference tournament, but they could, at least not look like the team that lost 5 straight early in the season and like everything was a waste of time. And so that would be a good thing.
Yeah, no question. And I think to me, it looks like Keith's more relaxed. I mean, he looked relaxed last night because I feel like in the past he's really put that Superman cape on, taking tough shots. When he's so athletic, he doesn't have to take some of those tough shots. He can find a better shot, and I believe that's probably what Coach Brand and the staff are trying to show him and help him navigate through that. Because, like you just mentioned usage rate, and I don't know all the statistics, but based on the games I've watched, he's got to be up there as one of his usage rate has to be one of the highest based on all the things he's done.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's top in the conference. Right up there in the conference, and probably pretty high, just nationally too.
Yeah. Also, I want to talk a little bit about the play of Madsen. I think he was 3 for 4 last night. Mason was from 3-point land. Is that right? Yeah. So I thought he's been a pleasant surprise. And listen, I did know a lot about him coming into this. I think I feel like his brother got more of the hype, coming into this. But I've been pleasantly surprised with Mason on a couple different fronts. I could see he's making some mistakes here and there. He's a freshman, obviously, and he didn't play early on with the boot on early in the season. But I mean, it's kind of like with Jeremiah. He's working hard. Like, you can never fault his effort out there. He's always cheering for his teammates. He's enthusiastic on the bench. If you look at it, every time somebody comes out, Mason jumps up and goes to high five him. He doesn't put his fist out sitting down. He jumps and goes and high fives the guy, says something to him, pats him on the back. And I think those things, just being a great teammate, and those things, they end up translating on the court. And you're starting to see the success he's had on the court. And I think without his shooting, we might not have won some of these basketball games.
Yeah, I mean, certainly last night, him hitting a couple of those bombs in the first half, it really brought him back, but it also kind of pulled Tulsa out of that zone they were playing and helped space the floor and open things up. So I'm totally with you on that front. And yeah, it's funny, Gabe he's the higher rated recruit, and I'm not sure what's going to happen with Gabe moving forward, but he definitely got more of the attention coming in, and there was a sense that, like, well, they just took Mason to get Gabe to come here. And to his credit, Brandon was always publicly and privately like, that's not the case. Like, we think Mason's a good player. And I actually had a couple people outside of the program who knew them tell me before the season, at least freshman year, I think Mason has a better chance to play and make an impact this season. Now, they were saying that without knowing that Gabe was going to opt out, so it ended up being, the case. But just because of what he does well, really fits into Brandon's system. He's a very smart player. He's a pretty good passer. He plays defense. He has an outside, shot. And so I think everyone just kind of thought like, first of all, those are some things this team desperately needs that Gabe does well. But just kind of his mentality, we talked about why maybe Zach Harvey wasn't the best fit from like a mindset perspective. Like Gabe does kind of fit into, I think what Brandon wants to do, the same way that, Jeremiah does and David DeJulius does and things like that. So I'm not surprised that he's kind of found a role for himself so far, but especially after the ankle injury to start the season and all that kind of stuff, I am pleasantly surprised with how well he's played, and he doesn't seem overwhelmed or out of place out there at any point. And for any freshman, I think that's impressive.
Yeah, and we've seen improvement in Vogt when I think everybody on Twitter had benched Chris Vogt. My response to that was, listen, folks, Vogt may not be playing well right now. Vogt might not be the answer the entire season, but we need him. Like this team needs that guy in spots, and I think that was evident in not only some other games that we won on the 4-0 run, but also the game last night. I think he did some very valuable things, and I'm liking the improvement. That we're seeing from Chris.
Yeah, my thing on Vogt has always been like I think the worst thing that happened to him was how well he played to start the year last year.
Mm-hmm.
Like he wasn't supposed to be cleared. No one thought he was going to get the waiver, so they didn't even think he was going to play last year. And then he comes in and Jaren's having his issues and is banged up, and they really played through Chris early on, and I think he just took a lot of teams by surprise because they weren't ready for him. And then he got banged up, and teams started, putting him on the scouting report, and it just kind of fell apart from there. And then I think people's expectations were a little too high for him because he played so well. And, I don't think, the joke, obviously, he came with Brandon, and, Brandon seems to like him more than any UC fans do just from an on-court perspective. I think there's probably some truth to that. But, yeah, I think some of the games where he's had that good role this season where it's been a good matchup or they've needed his length and his height, that was probably more what his role should have been. It shouldn't have been a second-team all-conference double-digit scorer, but that's the way he came out last year, and so that's kind of the first glimpse that people saw of him. But, yeah, you saw it last night on, man, he is just absolutely dreadful free throw shooter, so anytime he's in late in the game, I'm just like, this is a bad move. If I were the other team,
is he shooting like 36%?
Yeah,
36%
this year. He shot 52% last year, and we should have realized like 52% was he was stroking it then. But yeah, so anytime he's on especially late in the game, I'm just like, yeah, gosh, this is a bad move. But on that last defensive play, like him
huge.
Being there in the middle on that layup, he was a big part of that miss. So, and we've seen him have games where he has been a positive contributor. I think it's just been a little bit of a struggle to find the right role for him after the way things, started last year.
And that you just brought something up I think is great. So that last possession, like he was key in that last defensive possession. And I wonder if he wasn't in that game, could things have ended differently? And I remember during the game, Dan Dockich was calling for Coach Brandon to take him out that last possession. He's like, you got to get Vogt out. But I think leaving him in turned out to be valuable. By the way, Dan Dockich read my tweet.
I was going to say, you talking about your close personal friend Dan Dockich?
Well, listen. Every time I've got to say this. Every time he is on the game, like I can deal with Bill Walton because Bill Walton's funny. Like he goes off when he does like a UCLA game or something. He goes off talking about like swimming in tubs of chocolate and blah blah blah. It's like, what are you talking about, bro? But with Dockich, it's like he went on like this whole thing about Michigan, last night, and then the game's going like Jeremiah hit a 3-pointer, and then somebody else did something great. And he's sitting there talking about Michigan for like 5 minutes. And I'm like, come on, man. Like, you are killing me. And so I didn't even tag him in the tweet. Like, I just said, this is us losing to Houston, getting killed. Our punishment is having Dockich do the game. and then he saw it and read it mid-game.
Dockich is notorious for searching his own name on Twitter. That's part of his brand. And, honestly, a guy like that who searches his own name on Twitter, I feel like that tells you everything you need to know right there.
That tells you a lot. My dad, so like I said, my dad and I watching the game together, and my dad goes, "Did he just say your name? Did you tweet about him?" And I'm like, "Yeah, Dad, it wasn't nice, but so yeah, not good." But and talk about that. By the way, before I forget this, in the post-game presser, you guys did a presser with Coach Brandon last night, right, after the game?
Yeah.
Did anybody, you or anybody, I didn't get a chance to listen or see it, but did anybody bring out or talk about that when he called that timeout, when we were we kind of had like a good little run, and he called a timeout, and everybody's like, why the hell did he call a timeout? Did anybody bring that up?
Yeah, I asked him about it. It was
you did?
Because it was was strange. Like, in the moment, I was kind of like,
it was.
But he also, it was pretty clear. It was a 30-second timeout, and he went right into it. So it felt like he had a specific point,
right.
Obviously when he called it. So I asked him, and it was a little over 6 minutes left. They were up by 7. Keith had just hit a bucket to put them up by 7. And his explanation after the game was that he felt like they weren't playing hard defensively. And he was telling them, I think he made some comment like, I didn't tell it to him like this, but basically, we're not a good enough offensive team to sustain this to win the game. Like, we need to lock in defensively. Now, whether or not it worked, I think Tulsa came down and got a bucket right out of the timeout, and obviously, that 7-point lead kind of evaporated. But at the end of the game, it was defense that did win it for him. And, Brandon made the comment that, Keith said something in that huddle, and he felt like the team locked in after that. So I guess in retrospect that they won the game and defense was key at the end, so maybe you have to say that it did work. But yeah, his explanation was he felt like they were slipping defensively and that they weren't going to be able to win that game if that kind of continued, and that was his reason for calling it.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I'm watching. I'm like, okay, we've got good momentum, and he called it, and I'm like, what did I miss? What's going on? And I think he made a great point. There was something specific that he saw and he wanted to address. So, no, that's good. So let's talk about that last one of the last possessions there defensively, when I think Mike Adams-Woods, he got the tip, and then Jeremiah in the press got it and laid it in. That right there, I was completely shocked. I thought we were going to foul, and then they were going to go to the line, but chose not to. And that's, arguably the play of the game.
Yeah, and he said that their goal was to try and trap and see if you could get a steal. And, there was 18 seconds left. They were down 1. So they knew no matter what, it was going to be a 1-possession game, even if they hit both free throws, and they had enough time with 18 seconds left. So credit to Davenport and Micah for trapping without fouling and getting the steal. It was a great play by Micah. It was also a bad pass by that Rochelle guy from Tulsa. It was just I don't know if he short-armed it or what, but he kind of tried to just loft it over Micah's head, and Micah timed his jump really well, but it wasn't a good pass. So, but credit to them for taking advantage of that mistake. And then, man, what we talked about with JD earlier, that moment right there was, just quintessential Jeremiah Davenport. It would have been so easy to pull it out or kind of panic in that moment. And JD just didn't even think about it. Got the steal, went right to the rack, and it was a tough layup.
It was,
I think a good no call, but he had to go into the guy's body who threw the inbound pass, made a tough basket. And it also just shows you, if that goes differently, we're probably having a different conversation this morning about that game. But credit to them, they made a big play when it counts, and both those guys, are a big part of what this team does, and it kind of showed up in that moment.
And rarely do you see, in those type of situations, rarely do you see a steal or tip like that on the actual pass. So I always remember this when Coach Huggins would talk to us at practice when we would set up our press. He would always say, when you trap that guy most likely at that level of basketball, you don't get the steal from that guy, kind of like the ball's being released like Mike Adams would, and you chip it. It's when the ball's in the air and it's floating to that next offensive player when that other defender that we have that's not in the trap can run through and steal it. Like, that's where you normally get the steals at. You very rarely see what Micah Adams Woods did, and I think it's to what you said earlier. It was a terrible pass. Like, that was like a high school. That very rarely do you see that happen.
Yeah, and it wasn't even like that intense of a trap yet. I mean, I think Micah was kind of closing in, but there was some space, and that actually ended up being what got the steal, because if he's right up in Rochelle's face, maybe Rochelle kind of jumps up and, you know, makes a more forceful, better pass. But instead, he kind of just short arm lofted it, and like you said, you know, Micah timed it really well, got the ball in the air, and good play by him too. Like, he, you know, if you watch it, he control batted that right to Jeremiah. Like, he wasn't able to grab it, but he knew what he was doing with it.
Yep.
And yeah, it was, you know, obviously the big moment.
Yep. Well, let's talk about Friday. Friday's game, 4 p.m. game. We're back home, back in the Fifth Third Arena versus Tulane. More fans there, right? How many fans do we?
I believe expect? It's 1,135. I think is the exact number.
Okay.
Basically, like 10% capacity.
What did we have before? Do you know? What was the capacity? 300. It's such bizarre. It's such bizarre times when I look up box scores of different games and I'm seeing like attendance 100. I'm just like, this is crazy. This is just bizarre. I can't wait for the day we're back to, you know, full capacity. But so, what does this Bearcat team need to do Friday to beat Tulane?
Yeah, I mean, look, like this is a team they beat before, right? So, you know, they went on the road and beat them. They kind of know what you're getting with them. Tulane, they're a pretty good defensive team. They're pretty dreadful offensively. So I think it'll be an interesting matchup to see how offensively maybe UC you know, decides to attack them. But to me, it's like you just got to keep, you know, you got to basically take out the Houston game of this stretch and keep doing all the things that were working for you during, you know, the 4-game win streak, and then against Tulsa, which is like, you know, Keith has to be that distributor and, you know, command the defense in a good way. You need to get a little bit of balance. You need a guy like Mason coming in and spraying some threes in the first half, or, you know, someone off the bench giving you big buckets. Like we didn't talk about it, but that Mikey Saunders 3 late in the second half from the corner was a huge shot. So
was that from, did Keith throw that pass there? Was that the one where
I don't remember. He might have though.
I thought he penetrated and kicked it out to him, but yeah, that was big. That was definitely big. And that was good that Mikey hit that 3, because I think even was it prior to he threw that horrible alley-oop? Was that before?
It was before that, yeah.
That was horrible.
John even mentioned after the game that he threw a terrible pass trying to get it to Tari, and he said, like, I don't know why I didn't take him out, but basically I'm glad I didn't, because then he came back down and hit that 3, you know, not too long afterwards. So yeah, I mean, I think you need to continue to have that, like, buy-in and engagement. And really this, you know, the end of the season right now for me is all about, like, pride and kind of getting that culture thing right. I mean, yeah, if they can start flowing on offense like they have it at a couple different points during that UCF game, or even last night during the stretch in that Tulsa game, like, that's great. But they need to kind of get out of the general funk that has gone over the season. You know, in best case scenario, they could actually finish 10-5 in the conference, which seems, again, ridiculous and outrageous. And that would be great if they do. But I just think more than anything, like, whether it's winning the next 4 or just, you know, winning 3 of them, or, you know, finishing the season on a positive note here and in the conference tournament, by any means necessary, that's what this last little stretch has to be about.
Yeah, and I think the fans and the team just really have to look one game at a time, because it's, like I said, it's every game is a new episode of Keeping Up with the Kardashians. It's like you can only concentrate. There's no blueprint for the games. It's just focusing on that game, find a way to win, and most likely they'll win by 1 point on Friday. Right? It's just how it is. It would be great if they could, you know, get a 12 to 15 point lead, which, like you said, you'd be you'd be blown away. I think we all would.
What we want is we want some Sam Martin minutes without a COVID ravaged roster. Like, we want Sam Martin to play when they don't need him to play.
You know what's funny? I text little Sammy before every game. I've known him since he played in my basketball program when he was a little guy. I mean, he's little now, but he was really, really. Well, funny story about Sam. I have to find this picture. When he played AU basketball for us, his team, we had a mix-up on the uniform orders, and he had a couple kids on his team. There was a kid named Curtis Hoffman, another kid named Josh, went to St. X and Moeller, and they were bigger kids, and Sam was real little. So we actually messed up the order because Curtis and Josh were so big. We ordered the older kids' uniforms for that team. So Sam had to wear this big uniform, and his shorts were touching his shoes. The jersey's just super baggy. I have to find that picture of him. and now to see him today, in fact, I love the fact that he's walked on to the basketball team and he's had an opportunity to get those minutes in the game. What game was it that he played?
It was the second game back. I think it was the Tulane game, actually.
Was it the Tulane game?
I think so, because the Temple was the first game back, and I think he played in the next one.
Okay, yep, because it was at Tulane, right? Yeah.
Yep, yeah.
And he played good. He took a charge, and he played.
Yeah, he got a nice
assist to Tari. But it was funny. I texted him before that game, and I said, good luck. And then he texted me after the game. He was like, did either one of us know that I was even going to get in that game? He was shocked. He didn't even know. So you're right. It would be nice to see him get in when, and I hate to say this, but get in when walk-ons are supposed to get in. And that
you're allowed to say that, right? As a walk-on, you can say that.
I am. There's I played. We were in the Great Alaska Shootout, and that was when we beat Duke. Huggins was so angry at it was the first game we played was it Southern Idaho or somebody, and if we win that game we play Iowa State, who had Marcus Pfizer, and then we would end up playing Duke. But that first game, Hugs was so angry he benched everybody and put myself in and the bench guys in, and I'm telling you, I was shocked. I was nervous. It was the first half, and we really helped get the lead and help us win that game. And it was kind of a lot when Coach benched and he put Banks in, he put Martin in. He had a lot of young guys in there, and that helped that Tulane game, right? Isn't that right? Do I remember that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, but hey, listen, I do want to jump into a list real quick, and I didn't prep you for this, but I'm sure you'll be able to knock this out very easily. But once again, that segment was sponsored by the College of Arts and Sciences at the University of Cincinnati. And what I want to ask you, I want you to give the Bearcat fans your top 3 favorite articles that you've ever written. And this will allow them to, maybe if they haven't already read it, to go back and read them. So what are the 3 top favorite articles that you've ever written?
Oh man,
I catch you off guard. Sorry.
Yeah, it's a good question. I did think the one about John Brandon and everything he went through with his dad last season, that's just one of those stories that I didn't know a lot of it before I reported it, and it a lot of that wasn't out there when you're going through it last season. So I appreciate the people opening up to me for that story, but also just kind of a reminder that you never know what people are going through. I wrote a piece on Trey Scott. It was actually his junior year, so Nick's last year. That just kind of a big feature on him, because even as a junior, he was really the voice of that team that season, and I really liked writing that piece on him. And then let me pick a football one.
I'll tell you what, and Trey Scott, we're seeing the value of Trey Scott more and more every game this year on how valuable he was last year.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's like that is a perfect example of a guy who you can't overvalue. Yes, because he had a really good statistical season last year, but what he did for that team from an emotional leadership standpoint, like, you don't get a ton of guys like that, or you want to, basically develop guys like that. So I'm totally with you. This team looks a lot different if it has, him on this team this season. What's a good one? I liked the piece I wrote about. I wrote one immediately after when Fickell turned down Michigan State, but then a couple of days later, I kind of wrote almost like a TikTok of like how that whole weekend went down when Michigan State was trying to get him, and there was all the like flight tracking stuff that was going on at that time. I think it was titled something like "Wanted Man." Luke Fickell turns down Michigan State, saves Cincinnati, something like that. I really liked that one because it was like this thing that people were really tracking in the moment, but then to go back and like point out some of the things that were true and false about it, and also add a little bit of like information I had gotten after the fact. I had a lot of fun doing that. Just because of how intense people were on it in the moment, there was still so much going on. It felt like that people didn't realize, and that I didn't realize in the moment until going back and talking to people. So that one sticks out to me.
Yeah, no, good stuff. But my favorite article you've ever done, right?
The Jordan one.
Oh, of course. That's your holy grail right there, man. That's your. I'm biased. You do
understandable.
You do great work. I know a lot of the Bearcat fans enjoy reading your articles, enjoy your tweets, and whenever I have you on, the numbers are definitely extremely high. So, Bearcat fans, value your breakdowns, man, and your opinion. So let's keep it going. Let's hope we keep winning, and we can get you back on as we get ready to make a big run in the conference tournament.
I appreciate you having me on. If that's the way it all plays out, I'll be happy to do so. But no, I appreciate you having me on, and I'll support for sure.
Yeah, no doubt. Always appreciate you coming on the Bearcat Basketball Podcast, presented by the Healthcare Management Group. Hey, I'll let you get to work, man. You got to write some articles. I don't know what you got to write. Got to get to work, my man. So appreciate it, and we'll definitely catch up soon. Okay.
All right. Thanks, Meach.
All right, Justin. Take care, buddy.
I want to thank everyone for listening to Season 2 of the Bearcat Basketball Podcast. Once again, you can follow me on social media. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Alex_Meacham. Meacham spelled Meacham. I'm also on Facebook and LinkedIn, Alex Meacham. On Snapchat, Big Meach 41. And I'm now dancing on TikTok at Alex Meacham 41. I appreciate everyone listening to the Bearcat Basketball Podcast. Go Bearcats!